Healthcare comes under pressure today as the Senate is expected to begin voting within the hour to repeal the law. Meanwhile, the growing list of exemptions being handed out has surpassed 700 employers. Joining me now is Betsy McCoy, former Lieutenant Governor of New York and the author of the Obama Health Law, What It Says and How to Overturn It, and Michael Cannon, Director of Health Policy Studies for the Cato Institute. Betsy, I'm going to go right to here it is. That's all 2,700 pages of it?
Yes, and this law shreds your constitutional rights. That's one of the two major reasons the Senate should be holding this vote, which will begin any moment.
Talk to us about the vote. What does the vote mean?
Well, the vote means two things. First of all, every member of the United States Senate took an oath to uphold the Constitution. And 2 days ago, Judge Roger Vinson declared this law unconstitutional and null and void.
We'll get to that.
Senators have an obligation to repeal it.
The constitutionality of it, but the vote. Let's stay on the vote.
That's right. Secondly, the Senate should be voting to repeal this because all America deserves a waiver. As you pointed out, the White House has granted 777 waivers to favored companies and unions, but not to the average Joe. So let Congress give them a waiver.
Michael Cannon, I'm going to go to you. 733 waivers. The one that sticks out to me, SEIU has 3 waivers, sir. This is the group. These are the amigos that said that Obamacare was mandatory. They needed it. We all needed it, and now they've gone ahead and asked for 3 of the 703. By the way, unions. 40% of the waivers. 40% of the waivers, yet they represent somewhere around 7% of the workforce.
That's right. You know, they supported the president. The unions support the Democratic Party. They supported this law, and now they're saying higher health care costs for thee, but not for me. And the fact that the administration is giving these unions, or I'm sorry, giving 40% of these waivers to unions, smacks of corruption. It smacks of a deal, and that impression is just, I think, cemented by the fact that the Obama administration hasn't even given any clear guidelines as to how it's making these decisions in the first place.
Well, how are they?
Let me make it really clear
how are they making
that there may be
no
guidelines.
one really knows except favoritism, and it shows that this White House has been hijacked by people who don't share our values and don't value our freedom. In the United States of America, no one should be crawling to the White House for a waiver. Everyone is supposed to be treated equally under the rule of law.
You're with the Cato Institute. Look, I'd want a waiver. If I had a small business, I said, give me a waiver, too. Right. You can't blame them for asking for a waiver, though, right?
In a sense, a federal district court in Florida just gave us all a waiver by declaring Obamacare unconstitutional. And I think that, you know, what's most telling about this is the waivers, the 700-some waivers that we're talking about right now, only pertain to one regulation in Obamacare. Obamacare has regulations A through Z, actually more than that. But here we're talking about 700 waivers just for regulation A. There are more waivers to come. We may see more favoritism.
Betsy,
and something else that's...
I'm sorry, hold on, hang in there, Mr. Cannon. The International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the Pipe Fitters Union, Operating Engineers. This page has almost half of them. UFCW, Local Amalgamated Welfare Fund.
Unions are clearly very favored. Andy Stern, the head of SEIU, one of the biggest unions in the nation, donated $27 million to Obama's campaign. They're going to rename the Lincoln Bedroom after this man. He goes to the White House so often. But it's just an example of this far more dangerous issue, which is that the White House does not treat people equally under the rule of law. It is corroding our constitutional system and endangering our rights.
Listen, I do the math. I'm following the money here. 7% of the workforce is unionized, so 7% of 700 should be about 50 or so, but there are clearly almost 300 of them. So let's get on to the point you just made. Did the Attorney General in Florida give us all a waiver? Where does that stand? What are the odds of repealing the whole health care, Obamacare law?
Well, the odds that Obamacare is going to be wiped from the U.S. code increased this week dramatically when a federal district court in Florida ruled the entire law is void. They found the individual mandate is unconstitutional. They found that if you agreed with the administration's argument about its constitutionality, that would turn the Constitution on its head and give the federal government unlimited power.
Betsy, last word. Hold on, my last word to Betsy. We're running out of time. I apologize. Go ahead, Betsy.
This case will go through the appeals court with a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court before the presidential election, and with the Constitution on our side, I'm confident freedom will prevail.
We're going to have to leave it there. Would you hire a guy to help fix the economy? that lost more than 20,000 jobs on his watch? Obama would. I'll explain next. GE slashed thousands of jobs under CEO Jeff Immelt at its U.S. manufacturing plants, sending some of those jobs packing overseas. But recently, Mr. Obama tapped Immelt as his job czar. How is that good for America again? Here's Chris Horner to break it down for us. He's a senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute and author of Power Grab, How Obama's Green Policies Will Steal Your Freedom and Bankrupt America. Okay, Chris, before we get too far into it, let me just show you something. Here's a 100-watt incandescent light bulb, now banned in California. Let's turn that one off in favor of this one right here. Supposedly the equivalent, made in China, my friend. These jobs are going from Cleveland, Ohio to China.
Hey, let me mention one thing on the heels of your last segment. Guess who benefits from the first waiver granted under Obama's backdoor cap and trade scheme through EPA, granted today in California for a firm that's using GE turbines. So we're seeing crony capitalism at its worst, a firm that, yes, offshores and outsources, as happens when political capitalism here, when politically directed, highly inefficient use of resources is directed, making us a very inhospitable place to manufacture things. So if GE wins, this is going to be a very expensive place, America is,
hey, Chris,
to conduct business.
I understand why GE's doing it. Look, they see an opening. They say, look, Immelt, you got the presidency here. Go for it. Go knock yourself out. Go send some green, I don't know, green business our way. But why does Mr. Obama pick a guy who lost, frankly, 20,000 jobs under his watch since 2001?
This is the biggest lobbying force in Washington. They increased their lobbying budget by 49% last year to $39.3 million, bigger than anybody. They're the biggest stimulus baby. So when you rob Peter to pay Paul, President Obama can count on Paul's enthusiastic support, and sometimes, as we're finding out, the entire enterprise was Paul's idea, but this is scandalously ridiculous. He's bringing him in as a job czar when the guy's agenda, if he succeeds, makes jobs much more expensive to create in America, makes it much more expensive to use energy. We're mandated by politicians to be much less efficient, use more workers to create a unit of energy. GE's agenda is not good for America, even if in the short term it's good for GE, though that has yet to really play out under Immelt,
Chris,
as we've seen.
very quickly, we only have a few seconds in the segment, maybe 20 seconds or so. What's wrong with this bulb right here? What's wrong with this incandescent bulb?
It didn't have a high enough per unit profit margin. Sylvania and GE do much better with the more expensive units.
All right, we're gonna keep you for the next block. We're gonna be back in just a minute with more of this discussion. President Obama's call to regulate carbon isn't finding a warm welcome in Congress, even with members of his own party. Instead, a bipartisan plan to strip the EPA of the power to regulate carbon is gaining momentum. We're back with Chris Horner of the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Chris, go ahead. The EPA, for me, it seems like an end around. We had cap and trade. It was a big thing. It failed. It failed miserably. But then the Obama administration says, you know what, EPA, we're going to empower you with keeping a lid on carbon. What's the difference?
Well, on April Fool's Day 2007, a 5-4 decision of the Supreme Court said EPA can regulate anything. That means air, oxygen, even air, as an air pollutant under the Clean Air Act, so long as they claim a grounding in the statute. So EPA said, okay, we will regulate carbon dioxide as a pollutant as a way to coerce Congress into coming to the table and agreeing to something the popular will was very much against. So now EPA is continuing the threat to try to force legislative action.
We don't have a lot of time. Who pays under this scheme? Who pays and who benefits?
Well, it drives up. The point, as the president said, and I have no reason to think he was lying, was to cause your energy prices to necessarily skyrocket and to bankrupt companies that he doesn't prefer. So seniors and the poor, first and worst, anybody who has a job in the energy-intensive industries, anybody who has a job in manufacturing, and then those very few people in the country who use energy, which I know is only very few of us, apparently. But that's who it's aimed at, because we're using too much stuff and too much energy, according to our political elites.
So it is, in essence, a cap and trade bill, a law that it's a regulation, a cap and trade regulation instead of a law.
It's capped. They're going to try to force a trade under some technical provisions, but the court has already said they can. It's an energy rationing scheme, and it's being used as political. It's a threat, and they don't want to follow through on the threat, but the public are not going to let Congress do this. So we hope that Congress calls their bluff and just says, look, the law is going to be returned to the way it was interpreted for 35 years before the Supreme said EPA can call air an air pollutant, and EPA said okay.
And lastly, very quickly, we only have about 10 seconds or so. I heard there were supposed to be some checks that were going to be cut to people who fell below the poverty line. Is that true?
Some checks to, well, GE's getting a lot of them, I suppose. You were talking about GE. Let's bring it back to that. This is a company that's designed to run more stimulus. Checks from us to them.
I threw you a curveball, Dan. Chris Horner, we're going to say thank you to you very much, sir. I'd like to bump out with a full screen over here. I want to show you what GE's paying in taxes, you guys. Check out that tax rate at the bottom, 3.6%. Look at other big major multinational companies. Walmart, 10 times that amount, almost 33.6%. Home Depot, 35%, 37% to Target. I want to say thank you to you guys. Glenn will be back tomorrow night. Good night. Okay, so I was walking out and Glenn called and said, you got 10 more seconds. Get back there, Bo. Here it is. Thanks for watching tonight. Glenn will be back tomorrow night. He's got a lot to say on the situation in Egypt and the latest on the violent clashes. Good night, everybody, from New York.